Hi, it's Margaret, and thank you so much for joining me here on The Gardening Me. Today, I am talking about arborvitae, aka thuja, aka northern white cedar, aka eastern white cedar. Now today, what I'm going to be talking about is one critical task that's often overlooked, but will make a huge difference to how well your arborvitae grow in the long run. Now, arbs come in all shapes and sizes, but the ones I'm looking at right now are the ones that are in practically every garden, it seems, where I'm living anyway. And these are emerald green arborvitae. A lot of the times you see them used for privacy hedges, windbreaks, and landscape accents because, of course, they're evergreen and they have nice dense foliage. They're relatively narrow and they have an upright growth habit, and they also grow quite quickly, especially for an evergreen. Now, these that I'm showing you here are ones that I purchased way back when we first moved in here, and they were teeny tiny babies. And in fact, they've been transplanted a few times over the years, so they're probably not as big as they otherwise would have been. And here I'm using them more or less as an accent. But let me take you to my backyard, which is where I'm actually going to be doing this task, which I'll inform you about in a minute, on a new row of arborvitae that I planted that's specifically for a privacy screen. Now, this bed in my backyard here is quite deep. It's probably about 25 foot deep or so, and I want to jam pack it full of shrubs and perennials. But at the back, what I want is privacy, and I wanted to create a deep green, kind of neutral background to offset the other plants that will be going in here. I wanted something relatively narrow, and I also wanted it to be quick growing. So the variety I chose was American Pillar. Now you'll notice this is right on the fence here, and on the other side of the fence are the emerald green arborvitae that my neighbor planted. This side of the fence, I have the American Pillar. These guys are relatively young. I planted them back, I think it was in 2022. And so they're only, hitting 3 years old right now, and they have grown enormously because when I first planted them, they were teeny tiny. American Pillar is a fast-growing variety. It grows up to 3 feet a year, and it's tall, reaching about 20 to 25 feet tall. But it stays relatively narrow, usually around 3 to 4 feet wide. So I did make sure to plant these about 2 feet away from the fence so that we won't have any issues in future with them getting too close to the fence. The other great thing about American Pillar is it's more drought resistant than other arborvitae varieties. It's hardy from zones 3 to 8, which is a nice big range. You'll notice that this variety is rather sparse right now, but it does grow tall before it starts to really bush out. So it's doing really well. I think a couple of them are hitting the 7-foot mark there. Now, there's one common issue that a lot of people overlook, including myself. I am guilty of doing this when I bought those arborvitae way back when we first moved here. And that is this here. The main trunk of the arborvitae is here. That is a secondary leader, and that is not a good thing. That is basically a secondary trunk that's going to compete with the main one. And the main difference between a competing leader and just a regular branch is that the leader grows parallel to the main trunk, while a branch, like here's a branch for example, grows out at an angle from the trunk. This guy here goes all the way down there, and it basically attaches to the main trunk and then just grows up parallel to the main trunk. Now, not every arb has multiple leaders, and in fact, only one of the American Pillars that I bought for this area here has that. But there are varieties that are much more susceptible to that, and emerald green is absolutely one of them. And here we are back at the front, and as you can see, each of my trees here has multiple leaders. So this one you can easily see, there's one, and here, there's a leader, and there. And the tree off to the left there also has a couple of separate leaders as well. Now you may be thinking, hey, what's the problem with having separate leaders? I mean, that'll just make the tree larger and fuller. No? Well, actually, there are big problems when there are multiple leaders on a tree like this. As the leaders grow thicker, they push against each other at their bases, and this creates some weak attachment points, which makes them much more likely to split apart, especially during storms. So when you have a tree that has multiple leaders, they compete with each other for dominance. So in this case here, you can see that we have 3 trunks on this arb, and had the 2 weaker leaders been cut off when it was originally planted, we would probably have a trunk that is as thick as the 3 of these combined and much stronger. Now this arborvitae here, it's also an emerald green, but this one did not have multiple leaders. It just had one, and look how beautiful it is. So this is the other thing that happens, is that when there are multiple leaders, it also affects the aesthetics, and it can grow a little lopsided. You have some stems leaning one way and others leaning another, and you don't really get that tight uniform shape. What I'm going to do is I am going to remove this guy here all the way down, and it's really hard to see. The ground is actually still somewhat frozen. I moved the mulch away, but the leader here connects to the main trunk basically at the soil level. I also have to be careful because if you see there's a drip line there, like a main line for water there. So I have to be careful of that. So basically I'm going to cut it right near the trunk, but not in the trunk, so that it is just outside of the collar. Now I can't really show you what that looks like down here. Maybe I can show you after it's cut, but right now with the snow and all that, it's kind of difficult. But I'll just show you here, for example, on a regular branch. So see how the regular branch attaches to the main trunk here, and there's slightly swollen area right where it attaches. That's the collar. You don't want to cut into the collar. You want to cut just on the outside of the collar. Okay, so that's what I'm going to try to do with this down here. Where is it? Amongst all these branches and snow. And anyhow, I'm going to do that, and then I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. You can see my cut right there. And this is actually what came out here. And then we go over here, and the cut, you can't really see it. It's just over here. It's very difficult to see. Basically right at the soil line. And then this is what the tree looks like now. So ideally, I should have done this back when I planted the tree, but I didn't get around to it. I always had it in the back of my mind, and I just didn't do it. So better late than never when the tree is this young. The older it gets, the more difficult it is to do, because arborvitae do not regenerate from the old wood on the inside of the tree. So if you have to take off a huge chunk that's on the side because it got damaged or it split or something to that effect, you'll end up with a tree that's half green and half brown and lopsided. So there comes a point where you really can't do that any longer and have a halfway decent looking tree, which is why I'm not even going to bother doing that with any of my old arbs that I made the mistake of leaving those leaders on. But with these young arbs, absolutely. Now, if you are doing this on very young arbs where the actual main trunk is still very thin and pliable, especially if it's in a windy area, I would probably put a stake down, and I would give it that bit of support just for a year or so until that main trunk thickens up. I would say no more than a couple of years. And after that, just take that out. When you do that support, you do want to give it a little bit of wiggle room. You don't want it tight around the trunk. You do want the trunk to have the ability to sway in the breeze, because that also strengthens it and, toughens it up. And that's it. Now these arbs are set for success. They should hopefully grow tall and thick and straight, and I won't, knock on wood, have any issues in future with them splaying or splitting or anything like that. Thanks so much for joining me today, and we'll see you next time. Bye.